The wind moves through the broken columns of Alexandria, trailing whispers of a name that time refuses to forget. Cleopatra. For centuries, her story has been told in fragments, half legend, half accusation, but beneath those glittering myths lies a truth far more intricate. She was not merely a seductress or a doomed lover. She was a scholar, strategist, and sovereign who understood that knowledge could rule as surely as armies. She was born around 69 years before the start of our common calendar, in a palace where the air itself shimmered with tension. The Ptolemies, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, had ruled Egypt for generations, yet they were foreigners to the land they governed. They spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, and relied on layers of bureaucracy to deal with the people whose language they barely knew. But Cleopatra was different. As a child, she found fascination in the cadence of Egypt's native tongue. Tutors taught her mathematics and philosophy, but she preferred conversations with priests and merchants, learning how fishermen spoke to the river and how traders bargained in dusty alleyways. She became fluent in as many as 9 languages, the first of her dynasty to speak Egyptian herself, and that small act addressing her people without translators knit her to them like no royal decree ever could. Life inside the palace was not a tapestry of luxury alone. It was a chessboard, glimmering with deception. The Ptolemies practiced royal marriage between siblings, a custom meant to preserve bloodlines, but one that often ended in murder. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, ruled through bribery and charm, dancing constantly around Rome's greed. It taught her, perhaps unwittingly, the most important lesson of all. Power is not possession, but performance. When he died, the throne passed to Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. They married as law required, but the crown was a weight too heavy for 2 heads. Courtiers whispered loyalty to the boy king. Her name began to disappear from documents, and before long, Alexandria's gates closed to her. Officially, she was still queen. In reality, she was in exile. Exile, however, was the forge that defined her. In the barren stretches of Syria, Cleopatra assembled a small army composed of Greek and Egyptian mercenaries, once loyal to her father. She studied maps of grain routes, learning that Egypt's harvest filled Rome's stomach. Controlling the river's flow of wheat meant influencing the empire itself. So, while her brother's advisors courted Roman favor with coin, Cleopatra quietly disrupted the shipments. Papyrus fragments give hints of delays and shortages that year. Perhaps coincidence. Perhaps early evidence of a young queen mastering invisible warfare. A year later, she returned to Egypt with her modest force. But before she could challenge her brother, another power arrived, Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, fresh from civil war. He came to Alexandria to settle the sibling dispute in Rome's interest. The city trembled under the weight of his legions. Cleopatra saw a moment that could break her or make her eternal. According to legend, she entered the palace rolled in a carpet. But what mattered was not the regit, was the audacity. That act wasn't seduction. It was strategy, a living demonstration that she could outthink anyone who sought to control her. When that makeshift bundle was unrolled before Caesar's eyes, and she stepped out, she was no helpless exile, but a queen who had just proven her resourcefulness. Caesar listened, measured her intelligence, and perhaps recognized in her a mind as sharp as his own. The two formed an alliance that soon became both political and personal. Her aim was not romance for its own sake, it was survival for Egypt. In aligning herself with Rome's most powerful figure, Cleopatra secured her restoration. Civil war erupted in the streets, and Alexandria's skylines turned to flame. The great library annex by the harbor burned. Fragments of wisdom disappeared forever. Yet there are hints that Cleopatra managed to save a portion of it. Scrolls found later in temple storerooms carry royal seals from her reign. Astronomy, medicine, the knowledge she fought to preserve, even as her city fell into chaos. When the battles ended, Ptolemy XIII was dead, drowned in the Nile's churn of defeat. Cleopatra reclaimed her throne, this time paired with a younger brother too inexperienced to threaten her. The peace she achieved was fragile, but luminous. Soon afterward, she gave birth to a child. The boy she named Caesarion, Little Caesar. The world would call him the son of Julius Caesar, though Rome would later pretend not to believe it. She raised him under the sign of Isis, teaching him both Greek philosophy and Egyptian divinity, hoping the future might one day see him unify two empires. Cleopatra's court began to sparkle with scholars again. She rebuilt what she could of Alexandria's cultural heart, inviting philosophers and astronomers to her palace. Among them was Julius, the thinker who helped Caesar design a new calendar when she later visited Rome. That calendar, refined over centuries, is eventually the one that still governs our years today. Few realize that Cleopatra herself, through her patronage of mathematicians, helped shape humanity's very measurement of time. In the years that followed, she rebuilt Egypt's economy, strengthening trade, stabilizing currency, and personally inspecting irrigation works along the Nile. She understood the river as both literal and symbolic power. If the Nile prospered, Egypt lived. If Rome wanted peace, it needed Egypt's grain. On minted coins, Cleopatra's profile stood beside Caesar's, equal in size and diadem. No other queen of the Mediterranean had dared such parallel depiction. It was her quiet manifesto that a woman could rule as sovereign, not as ordinary. When she sailed with Caesar along the Nile, the procession was not merely an indulgence of luxury, but an orchestrated spectacle of legitimacy. Musicians, banners, golden barges. It was state theater, crafted to remind the Egyptian people that their queen was not a puppet of Rome but the incarnate daughter of Isis. She turned pageantry into propaganda, long before emperors made it an art form. Eventually she traveled to Rome itself, where Caesar welcomed her to his villa across the Tiber. The Romans did not know what to make of her. Some saw scandal, some secret admiration. She dazzled philosophers with discourse, impressed senators with her composure, and unsettled Roman matrons with her influence. Marble and bronze portraits from that era depict her not as a mythic temptress, but as a ruler crowned in the twin styles of East and West. She had turned culture itself into diplomacy. Yet politics has no lasting mercy. In the spring of 44, knives flashed beneath the Capitol dome. Julius Caesar fell, struck down by the Senate's daggers. Rome erupted once more into chaos. News of his death reached Alexandria soon after. For 3 days, the palace shutters remained closed. Cleopatra neither appeared nor issued decrees. When she emerged, she wore no mourning black, for Egyptian custom linked death not to darkness, but to rebirth. Still, she understood the magnitude of what she had lost. Caesar had been more than her ally. He was the scaffolding supporting Egypt's independence within the shadow of the Roman giant. Now that scaffolding was gone, the queen stood on her balcony overlooking the moonlit Nile, holding her child in silence. The city was quiet except for the water slapping gently against the stone docks. She whispered something to the infant that none recorded, though one might imagine it was a promise to guard his inheritance, to protect Egypt's sovereignty, or simply to endure. Empires, she had witnessed, could fall overnight. Knowledge, if preserved, could rise again centuries later. The Nile drifted under a sun of molten gold, carrying the reflection of towers that seemed to shimmer between two destinies, one ancient, one fading. Cleopatra had survived exile, war, and the collapse of Caesar's protection, but Rome's shadow hung longer than any Egyptian sunset. Her kingdom was too rich to ignore and too fragile to stand alone, and out of that growing Roman storm rose a new figure. Mark Antony. A was Caesar, s. protegestoic in battle, extravagant in appetite, impossible to predict. After Caesar's assassination, Rome fractured into factions, each led by men greedy for the throne disguised as a republic. Antony controlled the East. Octavian, the adopted heir of Caesar, controlled the West. Between them lay Egypt, fertile, ancient, and governed by a queen whose intellect was as formidable as any general's sword. Rome had sent demands. Cleopatra was accused of aiding Caesar's killers, a political absurdity but convenient excuse for intervention. Antony summoned her to Tarsus to explain herself. Most queens would have arrived meekly, but not Cleopatra. She understood the language of spectacle as fluently as that of diplomacy. Historical accounts by Plutarch say her barge glided up the Cydnus River with purple sails, billowing like imperial clouds. Perfume filled the air so heavily that citizens followed the scent before they even saw her ship. It was not vanity, it was political theater, designed to remind everyone that Egypt still possessed grandeur Rome could envy but never replicate. When she appeared dressed as Isis, Antony was reportedly struck speechless. The world later romanticized that moment, but the truth lay not in passion alone. Cleopatra read Antony's weaknesses as one reads a scroll. His craving for admiration, his need for rivals to recognize his dominance. She offered him partnership, not servitude and alliance, carved equally out of desire and strategy. Their relationship grew in the fine architecture of excess. They spent nights debating philosophy and mornings planning campaigns. Cleopatra financed his eastern wars, supplied his legions, and revived Egypt's economy through new trade routes reaching into Africa and India. For Egypt, those years brought relative stability. The queen's ships sailed farther than ever before. Her scholars mapped stars with new precision, and her temples thrived. But Rome reveled in gossip. To conservatives like Octavian, Antony's alliance with Cleopatra was worse than treason, it was contamination. He portrayed her as a sorceress, Antony as her bewitched puppet. You can almost hear Octavian's propaganda machine printing outrage faster than papyrus could keep up. Yet, in Alexandria, reality told another story. Two rulers molding a vision of shared empire. They established the so-called donations of Alexandria, granting lands of Syria and Armenia to Cleopatra's children, positioning them as heirs to a new line of kings and queens that spanned the east and west. That ceremony was dazzling golden thrones, roaring crowds, sun reflected off silver shields. At it pushed Rome beyond fury. To the Senate, Antony had abandoned the Republic for an Egyptian crown. The stage was set for the final showdown. Still, Cleopatra played her role carefully. She trained Caesarion, then in adolescence, to treat diplomacy as art. She ensured Egypt's defenses were ready, storing grain, fortifying ports, and preparing fleets. She even studied naval maneuvers herself. One surviving inscription describes the queen who commanded on the sea as she did on the land. Many dismissed it as flattery, but later analysis of the Actium campaign suggests Cleopatra's orders directly influenced fleet formations. Then came the unraveling. Antony's forces met Octavian's navy near the Greek coast at Actium in 31 BCE. Cleopatra was there with 60 ships, enormous vessels fitted with bronze, rams, and crimson sails. The battle turned chaotic, engulfed by smoke and conflicting signals. Stories later claimed Cleopatra fled too soon, deserting Antony. But newest studies hint that she withdrew by prearranged signal to preserve their treasury ships when defeat became inevitable. If so, it was not cowardice, but cold strategic retreat. Antony followed her to Alexandria, where the remnants of their power crumbled. Octavian advanced, promising mercy to all but the queen. Famine crippled Egypt. The crops failed, and rebellion flickered at the city's edge. Cleopatra's advisors urged surrender. Se refused. In her chamber's walls, painted deep blue and spangled with stars, she planned her last gambit. Even in desperation, she displayed the same intellect that had once charmed Caesar, a mind that turned loss into legacy. She built a mausoleum beside the sea, filling it with gold, manuscripts, and symbols of her reign. To Octavian's spies, it looked like preparation for death. In truth, it was a message, a testament to permanence. If they destroy my body, they shall still confront my memory, the inscriptions imply. Then the final act unfolded with the stillness of a closing scroll. Antony, deceived into believing she was dead, fell on his sword. Her servants brought him, dying, to her. They laid him in her arms, and the queen who had outwitted empires whispered prayers from the ancient Book of the Dead. Modern excavations suggest that she buried him herself within the still-unfound mausoleum, far from Rome's reach. Octavian entered Alexandria soon after. He found Cleopatra alive, regal, and unbroken. He tried persuasion, even promise, but she knew what captivity meant. No queen of Egypt would march behind a Roman chariot in chains. So she chose her ending as she chose her life, on her own terms. Legends born decades later speak of the SP, the serpent bite that granted her swift death. Yet even that might be legend layered upon reality. Some medical historians suggest she used a cocktail of poisons carefully studied, precisely measured to create a peaceful passing. When her body was discovered, she lay adorned in royal robes, gold burnished against her skin. No mark of fear. Only poise, only the steady calm of decision. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, granted her burial beside Antony. Perhaps in admiration, perhaps in politics, Rome took Caesarion next. The boy was executed, one more flame extinguished. Egypt became a Roman province, its temples hollowed out over centuries. Yet Cleopatra's echo endured, for Rome might have claimed her land, but it could not claim her story. Her reign ended the line of pharaohs stretching back 3 millennia. But through her, that old heritage touched the modern age. Through her patronage of astronomy, the Roman calendar evolved into the system still used today. Through her love of scholarship, fragments from the lost library were recopied and survived into later Arabic translations that seeded the Renaissance. Through her mastery of performance, the image of female leadership acquired both mystery and power. What history often forgets is how intentionally she shaped that image. The coins that show her with strong features and hooked nose weren't poor craftsmanship, they were deliberate. She wanted her portrait to project authority, aligning herself visually with Pharaoh tradition rather than Greek delicacy. The same mind that mastered diplomacy understood early branding centuries before the term existed. In quieter corners of modern Egypt, people still whisper her name with affection, not born of conquest, but of intellect. She was the queen who turned languages into weapons, who navigated the paradox of being both Greek and Egyptian, feminine and imperial. She ruled in an age that demanded women vanish behind veils of modesty, and instead she appeared at the center of the world stage. The artistry of her life was that she made power look like grace. Try to imagine her last sunrise. The faint hum of water against stone, her hand trailing along the railing of the palace balcony, the Mediterranean stretching before her like an endless mirror. She had lost everything but Storyond. She must have known that story is the one empire that cannot be conquered. The light touched her face, as if even the sun understood it was bidding farewell to the last pharaoh. Empires rise on swords, but survive through symbols. Cleopatra became both a steel of will and the myth of endurance. Eben Augustus, her conqueror, sought to erase her and found that impossible. You cannot burn brilliance. You can only borrow its light. In the 2 decades she ruled, Egypt saw the last flowering of its ancient majesty. Under her, science, literature, and philosophy were not ornaments, but instruments of governance. She corresponded with scholars from Asia Minor to Nubia, sponsored expeditions up the Nile, and even studied medicine to understand the workings of royal healers. Her reign, though consumed by Roman politics, was a rare period when intellect sat on the throne in a world otherwise ruled by force. Centuries later, playwrights, painters, and poets would reinvent her. Siren, martyr, goddess, villain, but beneath every interpretation flickers the same unyielding spirit. She was the ultimate alchemist of power, turning knowledge into influence, alliance into sovereignty, and defeat into legend. And that is the untold truth of Cleopatra's end. She did not die broken. She orchestrated her legacy with the precision of one last royal decree. The empire that took her crown spread her story across 3 continents, ensuring that long after monuments crumbled, her name would still stand. As waves lap softly against the Egyptian coast tonight, the sand still hides her tomb. Perhaps that is fitting. Cleopatra built her life among secrets and left behind one Mara, queen of knowledge, whose final mystery guards her even now. The camera fades with the sound of tide and wind whispering through unseen corridors, echoing a single enduring message from the last voice of the pharaohs. Power perishes, but intellect endures forever.